What is up, 7th graders? It's Friday! Yay! Way to go. You did it. You got through another week of distance learning. I hope you've learned a lot about the presidency of George Washington. The way Discovery set up the readings, it is a bit odd. It kind of jumps around, and it has Washington's farewell in the middle of talking about his term. And the whole next chapter of reading, which is going to be about tomorrow, is also about Washington's presidency. But since it comes up now, we're going to look at George Washington's farewell address, one of my favorite pieces of writing in U.S. history. And we're going to look at two key parts of it. So let's get into it, shall we? So Washington, as previously mentioned, was pushed by a lot of people, by Alexander Hamilton, the Federalists, who really like Washington a lot, and others to run for a third term. And he would have been elected, but he says, nope, I'm not going to do it. And he wants to have that peaceful passing of power to whoever is going to succeed him. He wants it to whoever comes after him to be democratically elected. And to be able to rise up to that occasion. And he wants to peacefully give that power over and set that precedent. So that way, when we see, for example, I just did a whole unit with the 6th grade with the Roman Empire, every time there was a transition of power, there was a violent vacuum, and whoever was left standing took control. And he wanted to make sure that war and violence and death weren't what determined who would be running the country after somebody stopped. And he wanted that peaceful transition of power. So, as previously mentioned, GW sets that precedent for a 2-term presidency and a peaceful transition of power, which are crucially important. Another part of the legacy of him choosing not to run again, which actually works out because Washington passed away in what would have been his 3rd term. So it would have set up that idea where there is a vacuum of power. Even though the vice president, would have been set up to take over, having him set that precedent was really important. Washington writes a letter that he has published in newspaper, and that then gets published throughout the country. To the American people as advice to this new country. As he's leaving the stage, as he's retiring, he wanted to give them advice on how he thought that they should continue after serving as their commander-in-chief in the military and commander-in-chief as the president. He wanted to give some bits of advice for this new and growing country that hopefully he hoped would guide them after he was gone. And we're going to see that this is going to be another precedent that Washington sets when we see other presidents ending their term peacefully. Not, of course, if they died in office or were assassinated, but presidents will write a letter to the American people, will leave a message to the American people, or now usually will give a speech to the American people, kind of saying goodbye and giving their farewell bits of advice to the nation. So Washington's farewell address, as it becomes known, is an important part of his legacy. He gives 2 crucial warnings in it. Washington pleads to Americans to reject political parties. He fears that people will put political affiliation over national interest. Even though Washington, in a lot of his beliefs, is more federalist, he never affiliates himself with the political party. He really feels that it's especially important for a president to not be politically affiliated, so that way they can choose what's best for the country, not what's best for their party. And to always act in the national interest. And if you are fighting for the interests of a party, you more and more will do what's best for your political affiliation, not what's necessarily always best for the country. And he asks Americans to focus on what unites them and not what divides them. There's a great quote in the Discovery. I'm not going to go and read the whole thing. But it really gets into the ideas of pleading to Americans better angels. Yes, there's a lot that divides us. He's saying to them, but really you should focus on instead of focusing on the small things that divide us, focus on the many things that connect us as people of this country, and work on those things and build off of those things and find ways to work together across our differences, whether they're sectional, whether they're ethnic, whether they're political, whether they're based on faith or race, whatever our differences are. He encourages people to work together, find common ground, and try to find ways to compromise, to give up some of what you want and in order to push things forward and do what's best for the country. I like the quote that is up there. It talks about how he really fears that political parties were engines in which people who were cunning, greedy, who weren't bound by morality or principles, could subvert the power of the people and manipulate them. He felt that political parties were very manipulative at their core. And in a lot of ways, he felt they were undemocratic. Washington's warning, unfortunately for America, will go kind of unheard, and political parties, even during his presidency, will start to dominate and will become the dominant force in the U.S. government and our political system. Despite Washington, our first president, warning us profoundly, and oftentimes we've seen that political parties often have resolved that, to kind of block progress, to not compromise, and often has resulted in gridlock in our nation's history, not just throughout it, but even still today. And that danger of being too affiliated to the party instead of to the country is something that Americans bring up often from Washington's farewell address. Another big part of his warning was that he feared the U.S. getting drawn into foreign entanglements. That means foreign wars. You'll see that Washington is going to be dealing with whether or not the U.S. should get involved with the wars going on between Europe and France and the French Revolution, as we will see in the next week's readings. And he, in the end, will put forward a neutrality pact, that he will push for America to stay neutral, to not get involved in wars with the European powers, to not make alliances with Europe. Let Europe deal with Europe, let America deal with America, and we shouldn't get pulled into their problems. That'll cost us too much in blood and treasure. And we're going to see that throughout a good deal of U.S. history, the foreign policy of our country has tried to stay out of this. If you look at, for example, the history of World War I and World War II, both of those wars were going on long before the U.S. got involved. World War I was going on for 3 years before the U.S. got involved. World War II was going on for more than 2 years before the U.S. got involved. And one of the things that was often brought up in trying to stay neutral, not get involved in the war, was Washington's warning of no foreign entanglements. But we see that, especially since World War II, the U.S. has kind of moved away from Washington's idea on foreign policy and has become much more connected and intertwined in foreign affairs and is connected in many different alliances throughout the world, like NATO, which is brought up, the North Atlantic Trade Organization, which is brought up in our readings, but the U.S. is involved in many different treaties and has been involved in many wars since World War II, foreign entanglements that began well off of American shores and had us getting involved in other countries' wars, for better or for worse, but definitely against Washington's advice. So, question for you is, what was Washington's new warnings to the American people in his farewell address? And do you agree with Washington on both of these fronts? Why or why not? Please explain your answer. I can't wait to read them And then I can't wait for you all and for me to have a fantastic weekend. Enjoy yourself. Happy Friday, everybody. See you Monday.